Okay, so this lathe, it's quite old now, it's probably getting on for 10 years old, but it's based on what they call a Viking style lathe. It's made from a big, heavy lump of ash. The legs are made out of ash. Pretty much all of it is made out of ash, actually. It's made using green wood techniques, so lots of cleaving, lots of axe work, and it's a much more sort of rustic and appealing lathe compared to a conventional spindle turning lathe. The main factor is that you've got a big heavy bed that adds a lot of weight to it, stops it bouncing around, and we need this real strong angled legs to it to give it a good footprint so that it doesn't wobble and move around too much. The poppets themselves are just made out of some round wood that I've cut shoulders in and left a big strong tenon that slots through the bed of our lathe bed here. They've got wooden wedges that hold it all in place, but we haven't got an adjustable crank like on a spindle turning lathe. We've just got these fixed metal centres, and to actually clamp our workpiece between there, all we do is we knock it up with a hammer and then hammer our wedge in. So before we start turning, the next job we've got to do is get the string out of the way, because that just overcomplicates things. And we've got the centre on the end of our mandrel, but we haven't necessarily got any centre on our back side of our bowl blank. So what we're going to do is we're going to position it on the lathe and we're going to play around and find our centre. So we position it with our bowl blank on the right hand end to start with, because we're going to start by doing the outside of the bowl. So we slide that up and we have a bit of a guess at where our centre is. So we just knock it up with the hammer, not hard, just to support it, and then we give it a spin. So where we've got it positioned there, you can see that we've got this excessive wobble on the mandrel. So it's really important that we try and get this running as true as possible. Not so much the bowl blank, but just the mandrel. So we have another guess at it, and it's only fractions of a mil that you have to move it at this point, and it makes a hell of a difference there. So have another spin, still see that excessive movement. So we'll have another go again, and then we'll give it a spin. Now we've trued that up now, and that's quite acceptable. We're looking along, there's a bit of distortion on the whole mandrel, so there's about the same movement at this end as there is that end, so I'm quite happy with that. If you've had 10 or 12 attempts and you still haven't found your centre, and it's looking like it's been shot at, it's got lots of holes, you're probably best off to take it off the lathe, trim it off with an axe and have another go, because the holes will start to drift into one another. So once you've got that, we can then take it off the lathe, and we want to put a little bit of oil on both ends now, both centres, to help it spin freely on the lathe. Okay, so we'll just put a little bit of oil on those centres. Make sure it's got a good coating so that it doesn't get dry and get hot and stuff. We're going to get that string wrapped around our mandrel. So as I say, we're going to work on this outer face first. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to have it on the right-hand side of the lathe. And I'm going to get my string and I'm going to wrap it around my mandrel. Not just twice like on a spindle turning lathe, but I'm going to give it a few extra turns so that I've got more grip on that mandrel. And then we'll slide it back down between those centres. Make sure you go in your finalised hole, the one where it's nice and centred. And then we're going to knock that up quite nice and tight. And then we'll adjust this treadle a little bit. And we'll give it a spin and we'll see how it runs. And then if we need to make any adjustments, we can. So, let's see how that feels. It's not too bad at all. So this lathe is running off bungee. You can run it off a pole as well. I just like the bungee setup because it means I can carry it outside if it's a nice sunny day. If it starts raining, I can just carry it straight indoors. I haven't got to reset up any poles. It's almost like a self-contained unit. So, we're happy that it's spinning okay. You might need to adjust your tool rest, your treadle, until you feel comfortable. I'm just going to move this little nail, that's what it is, that just holds my tool rest in place. You haven't got to get the tool rest really up tight against the blank. It helps if there's a bit of distance. The tools that we're using are so different to the spindle turning tools. They've got much longer handles, we've got lots more leverage, so this gap isn't as critical. So the tools themselves, they're very different to conventional spindle turning gouges or skew chisels and things like that. They're actually a very primitive and ancient tool called a hook tool, or some people call them a snake head tool, because it does look like a sort of cobra's head. These tools themselves are all double beveled, purely so that I can cut in one direction and then I can flip it over and I can work in the other direction. They're made from spring steel. They are hand forged, ground, shaped and then heat treated, and they're a cruder edge than on our other tools, but they don't need to be as razor sharp for this. It actually helps if you leave a relatively coarse edge on them. I find that it grips onto the actual surface of the wood itself. The major factor is that we're not going to hold them so that this cutting edge looks like a gouge, because it will just dig in and it will tear out our mandrel and we'll be in a heap load of trouble. It's really important that we spin that hook tool right round so that the cutting edge is almost going straight up and down. When I'm explaining how to position these hooks, I try and explain to people that if you imagine the actual cutting edge as like hands on a clock, so if we hold it dead straight up and down, the one edge is pointing up at 12, so that's say our minute hand, and then our hour hand is pointing down at 6 o'clock. And what we're going to do is, if we hold it onto the lathe at 6 o'clock, it will just rub and it won't cut at all. So all we do is we tilt that hook so that it's pointing, so that it's about 5 minutes past 7. That will start to cut. And then if we tilt it even more, if it starts to come round to about 10 past 8, it starts to get a bit coarse, it starts to be a bit aggressive. And if we come round to sort of quarter past 9, you're just going to dig in. So think of it as that. We want to be working somewhere at about 5 past 7. That's the absolute optimum, so that it's got really nice crisp fine shavings. So wrapping our hand around the shaft of the tool, supporting the handle right back here with my hand, I'm just going to rest that onto the tool rest, and I'm going to actually start spinning with my foot and just gently touch that up onto the surface of the bowl, just so that it starts to clip the surface and start to true up the outside of the bowl. I don't want to push in too heavily to start with, because it will just catch on that uneven surface and stop the bowl from turning. So just a nice gentle pass all the way. So I'm maintaining that angle, and I'm not pushing too hard into the surface. And you can see that we've started to turn all this section, but there's still a few excessive axe marks there. So we'll go again and we'll repeat the process. You might find after just a few turns that things might have loosened up, so put your tool down and just give it another bash, tighten it up again, and then we can go back to it and we can start to true it up. Try and get nice long strokes with your foot, and try and maintain a fairly fast speed as well. A lot of people tend to get a little bit tired and they tend to go a little bit slow, and the tool will just dig in and it will stop turning. You're almost using the momentum of the bowl blanket itself to actually help cut through those fibres of the timber. It's also very important that we hold our hands very sort of rigid and lock our body off. If it starts to ride on the uneven surface of the wood, it'll be like a needle on a record, and it will start to emphasise that wobbly surface. So we've got to try and lock all our hands nice and firm. So with those few passes, we can see that we've got rid of all those axe marks. We've still got the bottom to deal with. We've still got this outer edge, but at this stage, we've actually trued up the main profile of the bowl, and we've started to get it balanced as well. That's the major thing. We want to try and get it running nice and true, and then as little wobble as possible on the actual blank.